So before we get into discussing the origins of the short story, which we won't next week, I want to take the opportunity to kind of lay an overview or a foundation of the short story as a genre and cover the basic elements of literature that you guys are all familiar with. I know a lot of this is going to be review. However, these are the terms that we are going to be using all semester long. So I want you guys to get into the habit of thinking about these elements, and as you read, consider how those elements work together in addition to using those phrases when you talk about specific stories themselves. So when we think about literature or fiction, there are different genres or types that come into mind. For example, you could think of plays, you could think of poetry, you could think of novels. But for the purposes of this class, our focus is on the short story. And as a genre, the short story, when compared to something like the epic, or even it's kind of the novel is fairly new, especially when compared to the short story. But when you look at something like poetry, or then the epic, or plays, any of those types of fictional elements or fictional genres, the short story is relatively a baby. It doesn't come to life until probably about the 19th century, which is the 1800s, which we'll talk about as we begin talking about the origins and the development of the genre throughout the course. But for now, I want to focus on the definition of the short story. What makes a short story, and how that differs from other forms of fiction. So I know that you guys are, when you think about the short story, well, by definition, it is short. But short is kind of a relative term, isn't it? So when you think about defining a short story, it could be something, it's kind of problematic to do that, because various people have given various definitions of the genre throughout the ages, and that definition has kind of changed over time. For example, a classic definition of a short story is that one should be able to read it in one sitting, or and I guess that's problematic because one sitting for us now in our day and age is very different than one sitting of someone like Edgar Allan Poe, who would sit and read for 3 hours at a time. That would be one sitting. For us, sitting down for 30 minutes to read something is challenging. So some other ways of defining the genre: place a maximum word count of the story from anywhere from 1,000 to 9,000 words, or something that's less than 20,000 words, or no shorter than. My point is that people argue and go back and forth about these really kind of constrained definitions of what makes a short story a short story. But for our purposes, for us in this class, a short story is a brief fictional prose narrative with limited characters, and I mean characters as in people, not characters as in a tweet or a letter or whatever, but with limited characters, that's concerned with a single effect or narrative thread. It's got one focus, featuring an economy of setting, concise narrative with an omission of a complex plot. And keep in mind, though, that just because the plot is not complex, the ideas presented in the story are. because every word is important, and we are kind of concerned with economy here. Every word counts. But the point is, with a short story, you're going to have a limited scope, and it's going to ultimately also provide a complete, and I don't mean satisfying, treatment of the characters and the subject. It stands on its own as a complete entity, right? So that's kind of the definition that we will be working with as we talk about the short story. And also, what helps kind of define the short story is obviously that it has specific literary elements, and these elements are not necessarily different than those of other works of literature, but I do want to go over those basic elements. And forgive me if it's reminding you of something that you it's been beat to death to you in your head from, middle school to now. But these are specific, these are the things that I want you to start thinking about, and it's going to help you as you read through the story. So the first element that the short story, and dare I say all literature, has is a plot. And by definition, a plot is a piece of land or a secret plan, right? And that kind of makes sense when we look at the short story or a novel. It's the land we intend to cover, or a story that's that intends to be unfolded. And if you think about the plot, all short stories are going to have a basic structure. And you guys have seen this Freytag's triangle before. I know you have. And Freytag's triangle is basically, Gustav Freytag, he was a 19th century German playwright who said that all successful storytelling depends on 7 key concepts. And you can see that there are 6 here, and the one that's missing here is an inciting action. But you guys know that all short stories are going to have an exposition or an introduction, an inciting incident that spurs the rising action that creates the conflict, and it's going to reach a climax or a point of no return where things change and never return back to the way things were. And then following the climax is a falling action where we reach a denouement, or I don't want to say resolution, because resolution is that things are satisfactorily settled, and a lot of times endings are not satisfactory for us when we read short stories. So denouement basically means ending. So those are the things that I want you guys to think about when you read for plot, or when you consider plot. It's the land we intend to cover. Right, we're going to cover all of this land, and it's an unfolding of a plan through these various elements. So, what makes the plot happen? Well, you can't have a plot if you don't have a conflict. And the conflict is basically the struggle between opposing forces. And those opposing forces could be characters, events, circumstances, or a combination of the 3. And I'm sure that you guys are all familiar with the 2 types of conflict. The internal conflict, which is something that is an inner conflict within a person or a character, where it's person versus self, where there is a contemplation or a tough decision that needs to be made, or where a character struggles with an idea, like religion, morals, expectations. It's all inside. And typically there is going to be both internal and external struggles for the protagonist in every short story. So then, of course, after the internal struggle, you have the external, person versus person, person versus society, etc. So these are all external conflicts, and usually these external conflicts are going to spur something with that cause the internal, or vice versa. The setting, you guys know the setting is where and when the story takes place, and the time of the setting can be a historical period, a past, present, future, or it could be a universal period where it can take place at any time, anywhere. It can be a particular season in the fall, in the spring, in the summer, or a specific time of day. Especially when you look at the story that I've asked for you guys to read for this week, the story of an hour, it takes place during a specific season and a specific time of day. It only takes place in the span of an hour. So anyways, and then of course place. And place is not necessarily limited to a geographic location or a region. It could also be a physical location like a house, a park, a party, etc. Or it's a social or economical cultural environment. Where and when the story takes place is significant to all of the other, it's significant to everything else that happens in the story. Narrator, we are always going to have a narrator. And I don't want you to get confused with who's telling the story versus who's writing the story. And the narrator and the author are not synonymous. They're not the same. A lot of times an author is going to give us a persona of someone telling the story. That not necessarily the author, him or herself, but the person created to tell the story. I hope that makes sense. But because if you think about someone like Edgar Allan Poe, all of his stories are Poe is not telling these stories. He's creating a character by which to tell them through. So the narrator. And the narrator is ostensibly tied to point of view. And there are 3 points of views that literature concerns itself with. Literature is always written in one of these 3 POVs, and sometimes I'm trying to think if it's okay. So there can be different points of views in the same story, if that makes sense. So first person, where there is a character in the story that's limited to that one person. And first person, there's always a question of reliability. Third person limited, where the narrator is not a character, however, that we only know what one character says or does. Third person omniscient, the narrator has a godlike view of everything and feels what every character thinks, feels, or does. So these are not characters within the story, but with this one we are privileged with only one character's insights. This, we know everything. Well, we know everything that the author wants to tell us, right? So characters, obviously they're the peoples who carry the action of the story, and we have major and minor characters. And the major and minor characters, or the major characters, I guess, are changed by the conflict. They're changed by the climax. They transform throughout the story. And the person who is changed by the conflict is often called the protagonist. And I don't want you guys to think about the protagonist as a good guy or a bad guy or a hero, because sometimes these stories have pretty rotten protagonists. They're not necessarily good people, but they are the person or the people, the entity with the problem or the conflict. And the person who causes that conflict is not necessarily a bad guy or a villain, but it's someone who kind of causes or spurns the conflict. That's the antagonist. Characterization is really, really important with short stories. There are 2 types. The direct characterization, where the author tells us specific character traits, like she's 23 years old, she has brown hair, she has no teeth, or whatever the character, we are told something specifically about the character. In contrast to indirect characterization, where the author provides clues about the character through description about what the character looks like, what a character does or says, how they treat or react to those around them. And based on those descriptions, we can infer and draw our own conclusions. We can interpret the character in the way that we read the character. Some ways of characterizing characterizing a character, or providing characterization: physical traits, psychological or personality traits, motivations and feelings, behaviors and actions, weaknesses and faults. And I do want to look at the moral constitution, and how a character responds to issues, as well as the evolution or devolution. I think I'm saying that right. Devolution, evolution, devolution, however you want to say it. How the character changes during the course of the story, and of course that's due to the conflict. If there's no change, there's no real kind of story. So a lot of times people call that transformation. A lot of times people call it an epiphany. But regardless, there's going to be some sort of change, for better or for worse, within a character in a short story. They have then, besides these kind of common traditional type elements, you also have specific techniques that the author uses, like irony, where we have the differences between appearance and reality, expectation and result, or meaning and intention. And there are 3 types of irony: the verbal irony, where words are meant the opposite, kind of like a sarcasm; situational irony, where an event occurs that directly contradicts, like for example a firehouse being set on fire. There's irony in that. And dramatic irony, which is where we have a contradiction between what a character thinks and what the reader or audience knows to be true. So for example, we'll talk about this when we talk about the story of An Hour, but what we know about Mrs. Mallard and what happens to her transformations over the course of the story, is very different than what the other characters know, and how they respond to the ending of the story, or what they say, is very different than what we know to be true. So keep an eye out for those types of ironies, because especially verbal irony and dramatic irony. So symbolism, and I'm sorry that I'm kind of blowing through these, but I am kind of taking for granted that you guys are familiar with these terms and know in no uncertain terms what these are, and these will be the basis of, we're going to use these kind of elements to guide our conversation and conversations throughout the kind of course of the semester. So if you have any questions about any of this, just feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to explain or provide you some more resources. Symbol or symbolism is basically when anything stands for something other than itself. It's when we take tangible objects to represent abstract ideas. For example, an empty cupboard, right, could represent hunger. Or an open window represents freedom, right? Or, being able to breathe, or something like that. And symbols can be broken down into 2 types, where we have universal or conventional, where they kind of span across cultures and time. A cross is going to be symbolic of Christianity or Christian virtues. A dove is always going to be symbolic for peace, because it's a universal or conventional symbol. The spring, as in the time of the year, is always going to be symbolic of beginnings, new rebirth kinds of things. Those are universal or conventional symbols. And then there are contextual symbols that rely on they're specific to the stories themselves. So it means nothing on its own, but within the context and the confines of that short story, it has meaning, it has value. Okay. And then finally, all of these elements together, plot, character, irony, symbolism, all of those things, when you look at them in totality, they always kind of influence a specific theme. And when I'm saying theme, I don't mean a moral. I mean it's not a moral. For example, a moral of a story is, the grass is always greener on the other side, or the grass isn't always greener on the other side. That's not what I mean when I say theme. What I mean by theme is that it's a central idea or thought or underlying meaning, implied or direct, that is revealed through the story. It's this dominant idea that's made concrete through a representation of a person, an action, an image. And a lot of times that sort of commentary or observation of human society, of human nature or society, is largely dependent on you and how you read the story, what you take from it, what you bring to it, what you get, and what you get out of it. So for example, I might read something completely different than you because my experiences and my reading, my interests, my whatever is different than yours. So there's not always one specific kind of meaning that's made throughout the story. I will say though, however, you have to be able to prove that that meaning is valid through the text and through your analysis. So, for example, if you look at a topic or a subject that is presented in a work, like for the story that you guys are going to read for this week, for a story of an hour, one of those topics is marriage. One of those subjects is marriage, and the theme, largely dependent on you, is what is Kate Chopin saying about marriage? What is her commentary? What is she suggesting? So that's what I mean by theme, and that's going to be something that's going to be the basis of a lot of our discussions throughout the time that we are together, because theme, like I said, it's kind of hard to articulate sometimes, and it's not always the easiest to come up with. So but by analyzing these various elements of character, symbolism, setting, etc., you can kind of come up with a theme. So I am going to stop here. I talked way too longer than I intended. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to pick up with another maybe 10-minute video on reading a short story. So hang in with me, and I'll be back.